Anglo-Saxon Cosmology. Let's get to it. But before we do that, I just want to debunk this notion of 7 worlds mentioned in the Nine Herbs Charm. Some people like to think that this is perhaps like a peer into pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon cosmology. When I would argue this is not the case because this is really due to a bad translation. And because if when one knows Anglo-Saxon grammar thoroughly, they would understand, they would see right away that it cannot mean 7 worlds in the way that people want it to mean. So there are 2 videos about this, even though I do have more to say on it now, but that'll be probably for another time. So for these 2 videos, the link is in the down in the description. But let us dive right into Anglo-Saxon cosmology from other Anglo-Saxon sources. So what can be said about Anglo-Saxon cosmology? That it's Abrahamic, because we have to bear in mind that roughly about so. How can I word this? So in the 700s, by then, Britain, or definitely England, was pretty much Abrahamicized, if you will, or if you will, Christianized. I'd rather use the former. Had become Abrahamic. The kings of their time converted to Christianity, or what have you, and thus. With the literature that we have before us, that it's a very simplified cosmology. It's not that really complex, and it's under an Anglo-Saxon vocabulary. So you would have Anglo-Saxon words that would describe Christian ideas. So, for example, if I were to be a missionary and go to gamers, I would have to use their language to convey Christian ideas Abrahamic ideas, that Jesus he spawned and died on the 3rd round. He spawned and respawned on the 3rd round or whatever. So anyway, just to get the idea across. Similarly, with Anglo-Saxons, their language reflected. So their variation of Christianity, its vocabulary, it's just like their own rendition describing these ideas. Anyway, so let's go a little further down. So we're going to look at three bodies of literature. Well, sorry, 3 texts. So we got Ælfric's Grammatica. This is pretty cool of itself because it's a grammar. I'll talk a little more later more about what that is later. But then we have Ælfric's Sigewulfi interrogationes in Genesin. My Latin is terrible, forgive me. That's a pretty interesting one. And then we have Beda's De Temporibvs. So we have 3 texts here that do talk about cosmology in general, or if you will, astronomy. And so this gives us a view of how Anglo-Saxons viewed, well, I mean, from the perspective of the church, right? We got to bear in mind who's writing it, who are they writing for, because we have to bear in mind that, like with languages, just because it's written by a group of people, like in the context of Anglo-Saxon England, where the texts that we have, they're written by monks, like a select few that can write in the language, so to speak, can write in Latin, so to speak, whereas we don't have literature from, let's say, a farmer, or what have you. So that would be interesting to have, but this is so far back in time where we don't have such literature. So unless it's a runic inscription, which those are cool to find out. Anyway, but let's move on. So Ælfric's Grammatica, what that is, it's a grammar that was created to teach Latin from Old English, which I recommend looking at, but it's very hard to read. Because you would have to know both Old English and Latin. Even I have a little trouble reading it. I mean, sometimes, but yeah, it's a great way if you want to know straight from the period. And this is like late West Saxon, to be very specific, for those of you who are dialect conscious. So, but as far as cosmology is concerned, let's go right into it. And when I was looking through this, Ælfric's Grammatica, I noticed that here it says Mundus, Cosmos, and the what we're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is what is called a gloss. So you'd have monks and scribes would have these things to like to help them translate Latin text into their vernacular language. So we got Mundus and Cosmos, and the word it's used next to it is Middanġeard. Middanġeard. This is really interesting of itself. Really interesting of itself. That this word is used. Middanġeard. And yes, there is Middanġeard, but we'll get into that later, ladies and gentlemen. So, what does this really mean, Middanġeard? Well, Middan does mean middle, and ard, you could loosely translate it to mean land, but it's more nuanced than that. That's why it's always good to go to the BT dictionary, the Anglo-Saxon, Bosworth, and taller Anglo-Saxon dictionary, which can go into detail more about what this word actually means and how it's used in various contexts. So it means like native soil, land, country, province, region, place of residence, dwelling, or in terms of, I guess, in a very plain way, it's just like earth or land in contrast to water, or as a firm place on earth, on land, etc., etc. Station, condition. So that's that's the various ways that this word can be used. Given for this, well, I would argue that it'd be more like saying middle dwelling, which is in accordance with other translations and that's not how you spell dwelling. Because this is within the Abrahamic context, where you really just have like heaven, the middle realm, earth. You have heaven, and then you got the firmaments and with the stars and the like the 7 planets, and you got like earth, and then lower than earth is hell. Right, so according to Abrahamic cosmology, right, very simplified. And so that's the word ard. But then we have Middanġeard, which is this word of itself is found as cognates of other Old Germanic languages. For example, in Old Norse, you have Midgardr, which is a cognate to Middanġeard, and it's more or less the same meaning as Middanġeard. So like the middle dwelling, the between heaven and hell, the earth, the world, and it's just interesting too, because I remember reading, going back to, where was I? Mundus and Cosmos. Definitely Mundus. I remember reading and how in a context it could mean like the world, earth, in that sort of way, but then again, Latin is not my strong point, for those of you who don't know me that well. But I'm mainly dealing with Old English. But anyway, further there. So Middanġeard. When I first saw Middanġeard, I thought this was like a variation spelling, like a scribe forgot to put the G or what have you. But no, ard is actually its own word. But it could be argued that it could be a misspelling, and it's just because you do have things where, like, for example, the word run in Old English, rinnan. You do, where there's a variation of that same word, but you have a metathesis of R, where the R is placed over with the first vowel, so you got nan, or something, a variation of that, and like that's your word for run, but also it's, you can flip that R around and have runnan, or runnan, and I thought, okay, well maybe this absent of G could be an example of a scribal error, so to speak, but Middaneard and Middanġeard are both attested, so that's pretty much it for this part. But moving on to our second text, Ælfric's Sigewulfi. That's an older spelling of the word, I think. No, actually, it's a Latin. It's Latin, yeah, I think. Anyway, so Sigewulfi, interrogationes, or tiones, in Genesin or Genesin. Basically, what this is an Anglo-Saxon translation by Ælfric of Alcuin's Latin text. For those of you who don't know, Alcuin, a little further back in time, he had influence on Charlemagne, and Ælfric is an Anglo-Saxon writer, so to speak, that came much later. So it's funny. You got two Anglo-Saxons. One wrote in Latin, the other translating in Anglo-Saxon. Wonderful. So what this text is, it's a conversation, which is nice to see that there are conversation Anglo-Saxon literature texts out there. So we have Sigewulf and Albinus, and they have this conversation, and basically it's really asking theological questions about really the Old Testament, and it's like from a linguistic point of view and a phonological point of view, and like a syntactic point of view. This is actually quite interesting to read. But apart from that, it's just someone essentially trying to justify Abrahamism. But who can blame these people at this time, right? Because Abrahamism was a dominant religion, dominant dominant worldview, and if you were to go against it, it would be bad news for you. That's unfortunately that's the way it was back in these days. But anyway, just to go into the text, the reason I'm bringing this up because there is mention of the other planets. And it's funny here where it begins with Saturn, how it mentions the heathen Saturn, and it's funny how in the beginning here it says Weroldricha Uthwitan Saturn that. Okay, so it's funny how it says here that worldly philosophers. Yeah, worldly philosophers say, yeah, and it's funny how, how this really Alcuin is saying how these philosophers would call, well, I mean, they would, how can I word it? So I'm thinking from these philosophers that they would call these planets as like planets, but I think given the time period that this was translated, they threw the word heathen on it because it's like trying to discourage people from like ever worshiping Saturn and Jove and Mars and Venus and and all this because we're talking about a time period where there were many laws passed through king after king to forbid people from worshiping wells and piles of rocks or because it's considered idolatry and how dare you have images, etc., etc. But at the same time, you have churches that have like statues of Jesus and statues of like this or that saint. So it's kind of a contradiction. So it's kind of like saying, well, it's okay when we do it, but it's not okay when you do it, sort of thing. Anyway, that's a tangent. So we have Saturnus, we got Jovis, we got Mars, we got Sunna, we got Venus. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets so far. And we have Mercurius, and then we got Mona. So we have 7 planets, which is pretty cool. Yeah, yeah, they did know about the 7 planets. So it's not like they only knew the sun and moon and the heaven and earth, heaven and hell, and that was it. No, I mean, they had a very basic understanding of astronomy, but there's something else I want to show you guys that. Oh yeah, so for those of you who, for those who like reading Old English, uh, um, you can also check out Byrhtferth's handbook, or I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of this. I actually don't know how to pronounce this. So Enchiridion. You can play with those keywords or what have you, and you might be able to find it on like Google Books or archive.org. It's a pretty interesting read of itself if you're into medieval literature, that is. But anyway, Beda's de Temporibvs, a treatise regarding astronomy. So a treatise is kind of like, how can I word it? Like setting it forward, so to speak. That like this is what it is. Like kind of like doctrine, like this is what it is. And we gotta bear in mind, Bede himself was a Christian. Bede is, I think his time was in the 700s, something of that nature, well before Ælfric. Yeah, so that's something to bear in mind. And the cool thing about this text, this excerpt that I had before us here, it goes into detail of like what Middanġeard means. So with everyone's permission, I'm just gonna read the translation here. World is height, and this word height is kind of like translating directly from the Old English of Gehaten, which means it's like called. It's kind of like how today in German, if you want to say my name is, it'd be like ich heiße. For example, myself, ich heiße Kevin. Well, similarly in Old English, you had that same verb, but in Old English, right? So like this is a past participle. To say is called, is Gehaten. Anyway, so world is height. All that which is within the firmament, that is like the sky. To speak in more pedestrian terms, space. The firmament is the heavenly sphere, painted with many stars. The heaven and sea and earth are height, again called. The world are called Middanġeard. So, okay, we're going to stop ourselves there. So, Middanġeard, this is from Bede, saying that, so that's the heaven, the sea, the earth are called Middanġeard, essentially. So this is a very, very, I mean, this is my commentary here, that very limited worldview, that you got the heaven, sea, earth, and heaven, sea, earth, that's Middanġeard. The firmament turneth, or rather turns, because turneth is the, well, translated in this way, it's like saying turns. The firmament turneth always about us, under this earth and above it, but there is an incalculable space between it and the earth. So this is really interesting. So it's like saying what the sky turns, and the earth doesn't move. What am I understanding this correctly? Anyway, so 4 and 20 hours are gone. Okay, so 4 and 20 hours. Okay, so the thing is, in Old English, similar to modern German, the way you'd say like 24 is not 24. You'd say like 4 and 20. Like it's so like saying 20 and numbers above that is like the same way how you'd say it in German. So in many ways, Old English is a lot like German. I know I'm not reading the Old English in this, but if I were, this video would be much longer than it has to be. But anyway. So 4 and 20 hours are gone. That is one day and one night before it is quite turned. It is quite turned round. Am I understanding this correctly? Anyway, and all the stars which are fast fixed upon it turn about with it. Okay, the earth standeth or stands in the midst of all, so fastened by God's might. It's funny, when I first read that, I thought I thought it was God's plural, but no, I looked at the Old English and it says "God is nicht," so I was, oh man, I thought there were the gods here. No. Anyway, God's might. Yeah, missing apostrophe though for possessive. Anyway, God's might, that it never budgeth. Okay, never moves, budges, or budge. That it never budgeth, neither higher up nor lower down than the Almighty Creator, who holdeth or holds all things without toil, established it. Every sea, though it may be deep, hath, or rather has, its bottom on the earth, and the earth upbeareth or upbears every sea and the mickle ocean. And mickle, this is a direct translation from Old English, michel, which means like great. This could mean figuratively or literally. So in this case, literally the great ocean. And all welling springs and rivers run through it, as veins lie on the man's body. So lie these water veins through this earth. Oh, how poetic! Neither sea nor river have any place but on earth. Okay. So that's Mr. Bede, Mr. B, and a treatise of like essentially whether every Anglo-Saxon thought this way. That's a different conversation. But given this and what we have of the literature before, from a historical point of view, given the literature that we have, that's pretty much the Anglo-Saxon way of seeing the world after Abrahamization. When all these kings converted to Abrahamism and whatnot. But anyway, the thing is, why have a treatise? Like, there's a reason why these things happen. Because the thing is, we're talking about this very thing that, these kings of this time, it's what, 100 years after or 200 years after they've converted, depending on the kingdom and king. That doesn't mean the people below them follow the same worldview. In fact, if you have a treatise, that means there are other people who don't think the same way. In fact, we got to bear in mind that there are other cosmologies out there. We learn from Snorri Sturluson of his literature and the Poetic Edda that the Norse, they have a much more elaborate and more complex cosmology, where like you have the realm of the gods, you have a realm of the elves, you have a realm this, a realm that, for all these different metaphysical divine beings. And which of itself, and I'm going to be very bold in saying this, and this of itself is derivative of the Vedic cosmology. And the Vedic is, well, I'm going to be very blunt about this, is the oldest that on Earth, right? And whereas in the Vedic you do have everything that the Norse more or less has, and more, and it's the oldest. Because thing is, we have to bear in mind of the age we live in. We live in the age of, okay, for some of you this may sound really weird for the first time hearing this. We live in the age of what in Vedic literature is called the age of Kali, because time is in cycles, and the age that we're in is the age of quarrel, age of Kali, right? So we have so things are actually not going up, as some people like to make it
sound that way, but rather things are going down, as in devolution, right? And I'll give an example with cosmology. So, from the Vedic, we have a elaborate and cohesive hyperlogical worldview, complete actually. But then, as time moves forward, with the Norse, you have some things that are retained, but not all of it. In fact, you do have distortions, because things change over time. Does that mean they're better? This modern idea that the future is better due to some arbitrary reason, when anyone who really studies history knows that's not the case at all. I mean, look at the past few decades, and like mental health. Are people better now than they were, let's say, 30 years ago? No. So the same can be said with how people in the world understood the cosmology of the universe, where the Vedic is in fact the oldest and the most elaborate and complete, whereas the Norse, it's and other later cosmologies are actually derivative and distorted, and rather incomplete. But then we go to Abrahamisation of Europe and especially of Anglo-Saxon England, where all you have is really heaven, earth, and the other planets, and hell. And that's pretty much it. So, as far as the Anglo-Saxon cosmology, and this is Anglo-Saxon cosmology after Abrahamisation, is very simple. I would imagine that the Anglo-Saxon pre-Christian cosmology would be something similar to the Norse, with this or that variation. I don't know, but at the same time, it bears mentioning that the Vedic system is the original system, and I'm of the view that I wholeheartedly reject this idea that everyone has their own truth and whatnot. Everyone no, because 1 + 1 = 2. No one has ownership of that. So these later cosmologies are derivative of the Vedic cosmology. All right. Anyway, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're new, and if you really like the channel, please become a patron at my Patreon page down below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.